Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Heart of New York show. Today, I am very excited because we're welcoming back Maestro Joseph Lento. He is one of our dear friends, number one, but this man is gifted. He's gifted in so many areas, in music and teaching and what's going on in the public schools today. And that's what we're going to talk about today. For those who are coming in that aren't aware of our previous shows with him, let me tell you a few brief things that are very impressive about, I call him my maestro. First of all, a proclamation by President Barack Obama was for the 2014 National Teacher of Arts and Humanities. In 1999, New York City DOE, Bronx County High School's Teacher of the Year. We'll jump to 2026, joint proclamation by the New York State Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart Cousins, and Education Chair Shelley Mayer. 2025, Award of Excellence by the New York State Department of Educational Chancellor, Dr. Lester Young. And let's go to 2017, letters of commendation from U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. 2015, we'll go back, recipient of Mayoral Proclamation, Yonkers, New York. Now, let me say something here. Joseph is also a teacher in good standing with the American Psychological Association Teachers of Psychology in Secondary Schools, New York State Certification Orchestral Music K through 9, and New York State Certification Social District Administration. Amazing. I could go on, but it's more important right now that this man is well gifted. It's more important right now that we get into the information here. And what we're going to talk about is how New York plans to change high school graduation requirements. You know, the portrait of a graduate, okay? But before we talk about this new graduation requirements, can we have a little bit of background in how the current system is working or how it got started?
Well, Peter, I never know what to say. Thanks so much for that introduction. I truly appreciate it. I'm grateful to you and Angela for letting me be here again. We're going to talk about the current graduation, but just the title of the new graduation requirements, The Portrait of a Graduate, for those music buffs out there, reminds me of the beautiful song by Vaughn Monroe called Portrait of My Love, and it was later redone by Steve and Edie Gourmet. Beautiful song, and the program is beautiful in many ways, and we're going to talk about it. It's important for our families who don't always get a chance to maybe think about or even have the information of what's actually going on in the schools, the graduation requirements. Sure, they get report cards, they see if their child's doing well, and so on. But it's important to know what's required, know what's coming up. Things are always changing. And, our families are busy working and raising their children, so hopefully we're going to give them some information that they might not ordinarily get. Of course, they can get it on the New York State Education Department website, but sometimes in a friendly setting like this, they hear it a little different. Presently, New York State has a 22-credit high school graduation requirement, and that's been in place for a very, very long time. And, it's broken down into math and science and art and physical education and English and so on. And it has a really long history. And the history goes back to, a couple hundred years. And these credits that we receive are attributed to Andrew Carnegie, the famous philosopher and entrepreneur of the 19th and 20th century, and we call them Carnegie units. So if they say you need 3 units in social studies, that means that you're going to be sitting in a classroom for X amount of time throughout the course of a semester, and once you accumulate that amount of time, you get the credit, assuming that everything was passed and completed, and you will move on to the next course. So that's basically, we've been using a system like that for a very, very long time. And it works. But it hasn't worked for everyone. And it's been changing. People have been changing. Society changes. And I give the New York State Department of Education a lot of credit for looking into this. A lot of people will say, oh boy, they're changing things again. That's because kids can't do the work. And it's not true. Kids can do the work, but the work isn't always geared for each kid. And we've talked about that on different shows and neurodiversity and so on. But this new graduation requirements will actually speak to all the students. And the things that people think will not be in place anymore, like Regents exams, is not true. So most things are staying in place. They're going to be tweaked, and we're going to talk about that today.
Right. I was saying, can we review the history of what led us to the current system?
Sure, of course. So, we all hear about standardized tests, and kids can't read, they can't write, the math is not any good. Folks, this is an old story. This is nothing new. School is hard. It's difficult. And our teachers do a wonderful job, but sometimes they don't reach every child. Sometimes it's a cause of the curriculum that they have to teach. Maybe the child needs extra instruction that's not available. Maybe there's something at home. So it's a complicated system. And we used to have things, Peter, that would address students who didn't quite fit the traditional Carnegie mode, if you will. Sit for X amount of classes, X amount of minutes, do work in a specific way, which there's nothing wrong with it. But there's more than one way to do something, which, is the foundation of everything I do in terms of education. So in the 50s and 60s, for instance, there were a student who went through school, and they got to high school. They didn't all have to take all of the math or all of the science. They went into other areas, whether it was what used to be called home economics. You learned, and I did too, I went, we had to learn to cook and sew and all those things in middle school, which is great. Students could take mechanical engineering, they could take mechanical drawing, they could take, cosmetology. Did I say that right? Where you become a beautician. I hope I said that right. If I didn't, I'm sure I'll get lots of messages about it. So there were lots of different fields, and we kind of got away from that. In the 80s and 90s, we seem to have gotten away from those things that make sense and giving students the other options, Peter, that they needed. We got into all of this standardized testing, and you had to all teach the same curriculum at the same time. It kind of got away from us.
Right.
That's what's led to this, I'd say, renaissance, if you will, of going back to what was.
What went wrong? How did it get away from us?
That's a great question.
Because growing up in the public schools, it was like, Ivy League in the public schools.
Peter, I agree with you. And
Right.
I'm a product of the New York City public school system. And at one time, the New York City public school system was the model for the world. And I remember being in, experimental programs and so on. And we're going to talk more about that. I know we're going to talk more later, and we'll go back to that. But it's not that it necessarily went wrong. It's that it didn't keep going correctly. We took some ideas and maybe didn't think them out so well, because education is done in real time, and it's hard. People have come in, they have different ideas about how things should be done, lots of great ideas, and not always enough time to formulate them, test them, see if they'll work, because you're on a schedule. Like the Carnegie units, you're on a timed schedule, you're on a clock. And you have to finish this by the end of the first grade and finish this by the end of the second grade. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can't really address things and test them if you're always on the clock or if you're not flexible. So what happened, in my observation, is that they became very rigid, really rigid, and really left a lot of kids behind. And, someone in Texas had to teach exactly the same way as someone in New York, and, vice versa. Some people say, well, Joseph, those are standards, they're good. We're educators. If you teach math, you know how to teach math. If you teach instrumental music, you know how to teach all the instruments. We can do it differently. We know what to cover. So the idea that we all had to cover A, B, and C exactly the same way caused a lot of problems, left a lot of kids out. And so now people are scrambling. They went to something, Peter, in the 90s called whole language. You got rid of phonics, learning how to spell out words and all. And that really is something that is documented that we can say went wrong. Whole language went wrong. We're going back to phonics. They stopped teaching children how to write in cursive or script. They're going back to that again. So that was an experimental period where I think more thought was required. I think, of course, now in retrospect, we can see more thought was required. And I think New York State is trying to get this under control, and I think it's a good idea.
So what's next? I mean, for instance, what should they know about the upcoming changes to the high school graduation requirement? What's with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of tension on that.
Really?
Yeah, a lot. People are not sure what's coming up, and you have people saying they're ruining the system. No one knows what's going on. And to some degree, they're correct insofar as the entire program has not been spelled out yet. It's being rolled out, but it's not yet being completely spelled out. So people will say, well, Joseph, that doesn't make any sense. Now, of course, I always think there's something good, right, wrong in everything. But sometimes you just have to get started. And the state has put a framework together of concepts. Folks, nothing's being taken away. If you still want to take a Regents exam in 2030 in calculus, it's going to be there for you. They don't talk about that for some reason. It will be there for you. However, by 2027, the new incoming group of students are no longer subject to the requirements, like you have to take X amount of Regents to get a diploma. You have to do this or that. The Regents exams will still be available for those students who want to take, the more traditional coursework in math, history, etc. They will be there. They're not phased out yet. However, students coming in, and we started at the high school, but Peter, we have to go back because it's actually starting in the elementary and middle schools.
Oh, boy.
And here's what they've done. And by the way, if at any point I've lost you or you're not sure about something, later on will tell you how to get in touch with me.
Absolutely.
And,
we're going to have it all up on the screen.
Yeah, and I'll give you the information.
Right.
We have we have all these notes. We never even look at them. But it's better to have them than not. And so what New York State did was say, look, there are a couple of areas that we want to focus on as an overarching theme to start. So in grades 1 through 4, students will begin to be taught how to take care of money. A course in economics, starting as early as first grade. And so by the end of 4th grade, they will have had to receive a structured amount of information on what money means, how it means to take care of it, how it means to earn it, all those things. When you get to middle school, traditionally 5th through 8th grade, they will again take the second sequence of economic literacy, where they will now get the second step of how money is earned, how you save it, how you grow it, what you do with it. And then in high school, they will take the last part of it. So by 12th grade, you will have had the third segment of that. So that's one of the overarching themes. The other overarching theme is climate research. Now, that's not my area of expertise. Money isn't necessarily either, but I know a little bit more about that. So that second theme, from 1st to 4th grade, students will get an allotted amount of information. 5th through 8th grade, they'll get the next allotted amount of information. And 9th through 12th grade. So there is a overarching plan focusing on those two areas to start.
Now, it's interesting when you're talking, because I remember having taken shop classes, how they called it CTE, Career Technical
Yeah, that's what they
Training.
call it now, yeah.
And they had classes like home economics, where you learn how to cook and sew. What's so different? I mean, those shop classes were really something else.
Oh, I mean, I still have the napkin holder I made in 7th grade. We loved it. And
Yeah, that's right.
Peter, education is the only part of, government taxpayer-funded programs that everybody experiences and has a piece of. Not everyone's a fireman, not everyone's a policeman, not everyone is a sanitation worker. We don't really have those other expertise, but we all went to school.
That's right.
We all have that commonality. So we all feel like we have input, and we do, and we should, right? Because we all experience it. And at some point, there's a lot of social impact, and the way people think comes into play in those areas. And somewhere along the line, and started in the late 70s, people thought, well, gee, if you learn how to make, if you learn how to do woodworking, that we're not giving you an opportunity to be a mathematician. Have you ever gotten the prices of carpenters to come to your house? They make a lot of money. God bless them. Wish I were a carpenter. We started looking at those things as if they were bad. A chef? Chefs, it's one of the top jobs in the country. Somewhere along the line, folks started thinking that those were limiting jobs, and that not a lot of intellect was needed for it. An electrician, a plumber, a carpenter, you need a lot of intellect and skill to do those jobs.
Right.
And so back then, we started thinking, well, we're not giving kids the opportunity to be a scientist. We're all not scientists. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a
definitely
mathematician.
not a scientist.
So we got away from that. And for whatever reasons, people decided whose pay grade is higher than mine, they make the decisions.
Right.
And that's what kind of led us astray,
Right.
to that direct question.
I think I've heard recently on the news that more people are applying for construction type of work and more physical other than office work.
Yeah, I just saw a special. I listened to lots of different things, and there's a guy, Mr. Rowe, he was on a Bill Maher segment, and I listened to different people, and they were talking about all the work that's available. Right to what you said.
Right.
And these are $125,000, $150,000 a year jobs that are not being filled. And right now, they said there's over 600,000 of them. And those are wonderful, careers.
Why?
Again, Peter, education moves in real time with society. So how people think often affects the way education goes. So there are social factors that influence things. And at some point, people start saying, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe there's nothing wrong with Joseph learning how to sew when he's in the 7th grade. It's come in very handy, I'll tell you. And so they say, well, maybe what's wrong with Joseph learning how to cook in 6th grade? I love to cook now. So we got away from common sense things, and it's kind of circular. That's just the way education is, and people wax poetic about things. And look, schools have always had their successful times, their not so successful times. It's because we're people, and it's like a moving thing. It's living, it's breathing, it's always evolving. And coming into this new Portrait of a Graduate, I think is, again, I'm going to commend the state education department. People say, no, it's terrible. No, you're wrong. And I really don't do that often and say, no, you're wrong. Well, I'm going to tell you, I think you're wrong. Because, one, you don't have all the facts. That's why we're here telling you
That's right.
that, folks, your education as you want it is not going to be taken away.
Right.
You'll still take advanced calculus. You'll still take physics. You'll still take those classes you want and take a rigorous Regents exam if that's what you want. But what they're doing is they're saying, hey, let's bring back some common sense. Let's bring back things that we took away that benefit our children.
That's the point. That's the problem, brother. I believe. I want to discuss, I think this is very important, the document you brought from the New York State Department of Education on what parents need to know.
Yes.
I mean, I've been looking at it for a couple of days, and I'm saying this is really, are they aware of this, or can you go over this right now with them?
Yeah. So, most of the time, we don't know because we're busy. And it's important for us to stay connected with, people like Angela and Peter who bring lots of wonderful information to us. So we'll know what's happening. Take an extra few minutes. You can find all these things on, the websites for your local school district, state education department. So Peter, for instance, why don't you read one of the things parents should know, and I'll give you kind of an overview of it.
Whole child development.
Beautiful. So, whole child development, that's a way of saying, look, your child is not just a number to us. Going to take into account that they have their own unique personalities, their own unique identities, and their own unique way of learning and how they need to be taught. Now, someone might say, and I'll say it, that's something that teachers do instinctively. If you think that teachers don't know our children, they do. Do they know them as well as they should? It's hard. If you have 150 students a day, it can be challenging. But they do. It's instinctive because teaching is almost like parenting. You're involved with children on that level.
Absolutely.
And this idea of the whole child is really bringing together something that we're going to talk about later on, and something that, I've been talking about, not just me, millions of people, but engaging the whole child means we want to be interested in your child. The more we're interested in them, to the capacity that any human being could be interested in 150 students every semester, and we do. We want to do that because it makes the whole thing so much better. So we're going to work on that more.
And I think even the child knows if the teacher is interested.
Oh, you can't fool kids.
You can't fool them.
Oh, you can't fool them.
Here's another thing, equity and belonging.
So we hear this word equity all the time. So we all don't have the same things. But what we want to do in the classroom is try and see to it if we can get students to have the same experience as another student. And so people can talk about equity any way they want, and it's such a diverse term, money and this and that. But in the classroom, we want to see to it that students have the opportunity that other students have to experience the same outcome. Now, the outcomes might not be the same. Even when we put students on the same ground, everyone likes things differently. I might not like something, someone else likes it. It's just the way of nature, the way the mind works. So we want to make sure that your children have more access to the opportunity of achieving something that somebody else has achieved. Whether it happens or not, that's a whole other set of, circumstances and just individual capacities.
Going down here, I'm saying, what can I do now? What can I do now?
From the parent's perspective.
Right.
Be informed. First, be informed with your child, who your child is. Find out what kind of a learner they are. It's so important that we know and understand how our children learn because we all don't learn the same way. And, go back to your just basic parenting skills. For those of us who have more than one child, each child is different. You deal with them differently. You speak to them. I have two sons. I address them when it comes to certain things differently.
Right.
Because that's who they are.
Right.
They're different people. And so first, understand your child's personality, why they are the way they are. By the way, the better first step is evaluating ourselves. What kind of learner are we? Who do we listen to? How do we listen? What are the things we enjoy?
That's right.
So once you have this information, you know what kind of a learner your child is. You can then, when your child's in school, you can better go through these things and say, well, how is that whole child approach impacting my child? Is it working? Things like that.
You know, we got a couple of minutes left, and I'd just like you to just take that time and tell them out there, is there hope?
You know,
They want to know, after all they're hearing and how Maestro, is there hope?
I'm very hopeful. And this is not the first time we've like yearned for, can we get things back on track? It seems to be, if we study history, and we look at different reports over the years, there's always a yearning to get things right again. And part of that is our own experiences and what we want, and does it meet with what the students need? And I do believe there's a tremendous amount of hope, and there will be a tremendous amount of progress, because if we can implement this portrait of a graduate, which means that your child might not have to sit through a math class the way they traditionally sit through it. We want things to be experiential,
Right.
where you're hands-on, you're learning things in a different way. So children are going to have the opportunity to experience, learn, and share differently than they were before. And right there is a great thing, because we leave so many students behind. And for those of you who don't understand that, I was sharing with Peter earlier, I could do algebra. I got almost 100 on every test I took. I would never get more than a 65 because I didn't show the work. Now, if I'm going to teach a class, I know I've got to do that. But if I'm a kid who loves math,
Right.
Portrait of a Graduate is not going to make me show my work. It's going to be concerned that I got the answer.
What a great show this has been. I'm telling you, I hope you got as much out of it as I did. There is hope. I want to thank you all for watching. Remember, we're going to put stuff, if you have any questions, contact this man, and he will do he's a helper. He wants things better, especially in the educational department, and he's the one to do it. I want to thank you all again for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time.